Let me see. When I first moved to Cedar City, you know, I was already experiencing this possession factor of myself where these entities of invasion were already manipulating my impulses, and basically having arrived to this city, I arrived understanding that I had to make sense of it. So I let my mind wander and try to figure things out for itself. Little did I know that the city I was in was influencing, the direction that my thoughts went and the particular matters that it even addressed. I mean, I guess that's what the rule of principalities and dominions, must be. So, I mean, having been here in Cedar City, Utah already, I got 1 year already in here. And up until now, I mean, all I've done is basically just fight with my psychic. It's like all these people here in this town, must be, I don't know, psychic, because that's all they like to do is just psychically, dart after dart after dart after dart. So, I mean, I'm here in the city trying to hide, that I'm aware of this psychic plane, and the whole city is here trying to drag their own dirt in front of everybody's eyes so everybody can know all their business and everything that they're about, you know. So it kind of goes like, against whatever my point was of being here. I'm not here to be all up in your guys' business, but you guys for some reason decided to want to drag me through it all, you know. So I mean, I got here, and essentially I had resulted with, these psychic attacks must have been because of the drug use. So, in other words, I had found myself in some way mentally making way for what was looking for ground to basically find itself justified in doing whatever it was doing, you know? So, I mean, and then knowing that people are aimed at people, especially because of their belief systems, but having experienced how my belief systems were not only developed, but also like basically torn down to the ground. Because now essentially the whole belief system is like I'm just dealing with a whole bunch of people in reality that are all living possessed, hiding from it, avoiding knowing the truth, or simply not interested in possessing themselves. So, it's like I have loose ends everywhere I go. You know? But the most famous thing that I picked up here in the city for some reason was this talk of La M. You know? I mean, for a while there, dude, even the sounds and noises, like always this invading entity when it would show up for a while, like that's immediately the first thing it would do. Like it would just lean on thinking about the streets, like a fucking hood car just pulling up to your block and like 10 niggas just jumping out all with guns and masks and, going and kidnapping your ass from your house, with no one and nothing to say anything, because who the hell's gonna tell 10 guys with guns anything. Imagine if, even more if they're automatics and shit. So with that being said, it's like, well, yeah, that was the old, you know, La M reasoning why I would think, probably, that drastic, La M, because that's the direction this town drew my thoughts into thinking. Those were the kind of ideas and the kind of attempts they attempted to draw my machine in towards perceiving, and thus, correlating whatever they seemed to attempt to weaponize themselves with, which were a lot of emotional outbursts, honestly, because it was like, trying to force me to play a role of being afraid or fearful when that's not me at all. So clearly there would be a lot of like backlash, and I'd have to I'd have to all of a sudden become the animal, making a point, because what they were doing is trying to corner me. So if I'm the animal and I was being cornered, then what I would have to do is clearly, demonstrate a physical, expression of dominance. And for a while, that's how I lived in this town, walking from one corner to the next, always puffed up, chest out, proud. And I didn't understand why, you know? And now, I mean, I've left that home, I left that environment. I lived in a basement then, so it kind of didn't even make sense, that I would be in a basement thinking about somebody showing up to my house to kidnap me or some shit like that. I mean, it was like a version of Taken, but just a game or entertainment, or imagination, better said. But somebody else wanted me to feel like it was more real than that, you know? Only because it would synchronize, dude. There were cars, like, all of a sudden would pass outside the block. And in that moment, boom, my ears would tune into the car. And I'd be like, that's him, that's him, that's him. Like pumping my body with adrenaline and all these chemicals, because of these hallucinations, you could almost call them. So imagine me living every day hallucinating, all day, every day, and having to hide it from everybody. And everybody seems to tune in and understand and notice that there's something wrong. And, they attempt to fix it, but it only makes things worse. Because, I mean, if you're already hallucinating, imagine people trying to understand your hallucination and pull you more into it. So every person you encounter just becomes more of a potential possibility for yourself to be dragged into a further delusion or illusion, because that's what essentially that would be, that experience. Hallucinations. So now I'm wondering how they're attempting to get me to hallucinate now. I mean, I'm here laying down ready for bed, and I'm looking back, reflecting on my year in this town and the way that my mind has been played with in this town, and the degree that they expected me not only to not say anything, but not even to acknowledge my own reality. So it's like seeing myself suffer, not having allowed myself to suffer, having forgiven even, that someone attempted to make me suffer, and having gone through all that just to be here again, like somebody reminded me that they got me to forget it, and they keep doing it over and over and over again, Like, look at it. I could suffer all I wanted and it would be justified, but I refuse to suffer. But their whole thing is constantly here, attempting to get me to feel like I'm entitled to suffering, And that's what this whole game is about, So I've been here in the city, Cedar City, Utah. I got a year here, and so far I've, battled the psychic plane of craziness and society working together as a group to make you crazy. So it's almost like I'm a woman who was lynched, except I was lynched in secret and in spirit mostly, even though I did have a lot of physical altercations, let's just say, throughout my experiences that were more with what could possibly happen to me rather than what actually happened. A lot of near misses, in any company. If you guys ever work for a company, a near miss is just as bad as a hit, So they're over here celebrating. I was made to think that I should feel like celebrating because it was a near miss. I survived. Where I was like, no, 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 no. Hold on. We're not going to just brush this off. I survived my ass. You feel me? So this is where we're at. We're making my haunting entities do all the work for us. So that's how the towns worked with these entities. That's how people have worked with these entities, And I mean, I've documented a big part of it, Not only my creative phases of making music, but even my in between moments where, like, my music didn't even remain music. This possession entity was driving the car of my music, talking always about behavior, Like my music was hijacked for a while there. I could go back and listen to all those songs, and I kid you not, most of that music was deviated by whatever possessing entity was there that pushed it from being a music, a moment of inspiration and encouragement, to a teaching lesson talking about behaviors. And I have plenty of evidence of this. Plenty. And yet still here they are debating what I'm saying, debating and talking amongst themselves, still right here in my environment. So think of that. Think about, I've already gone through the phases of acknowledging, oh, damn, I have a vessel that can capture other spirits. I have a vessel that can interact with other spirits that talk. Or I have a vessel that can interact with astral projections. Or I have a vessel that I could sit here and pretend that I don't know about astral projections and then turn crazy, just avoiding talking about the truth. And actually, even talking about the truth, I bet you I could still turn crazy, you know? So think about that. You know, and that's your guys' whole purpose has been here to get them to say something and then get them stuck on it. Because clearly, like I taught you guys, their whole business is 1 + 1 = 2. Now forget. That's been their whole game. This whole town. That's what they focused on. You know, that's the conditioning that they worked on in this 1 year that I've been here, is getting me to become this 10-second man. You know? Rather than being focused on goals and orientation and, you know, all these things. Like, come on, this entity is here depending on my visual data. Like, I can close my eyes and I'll do all my thinking all right, my feeling all right, you know. I can manifest basically my existential reality, you know. But when they're involved, all of a sudden it's not just my existential reality that I'm even concerned with. It becomes everyone else's existential reality. So like in that moment, all of a sudden, everybody's life, trauma, pain, problems, beliefs, disbeliefs, all of it becomes mine. You know? So I learned not only how to possess other people's lives through these people, but I learned how to fix other people's problems through these people. And essentially, it brings me back to being the student. You know? Not only did I learn how to become a problem solver, once I became a problem solver, someone put me right where they needed me, because problem solvers are what get destroyed in this world. You know? So, you know, that's what you guys go to school for. To prep yourself for destruction. Especially if you decide to use it. If you don't let them convince themselves through your life that you have succumbed to their will, or whatever it is that all these other peoples can attest for better, you know? Because I don't got to have the answer. I can look around at everyone else just like they taught me, and I understand that they'll have the answer buried in them. I just got to poke and prod them long enough to get it out of them. That's what they did to me. You know? So all people have all answers. It's just about being consistent enough to actually reaching it. You know?